Hey everybody, Shane from Norman S. Wright. Last week we talked about decarbonization, and I think I want to continue on with the topic related to that this week. I want to talk about something that we've been asked for more and more often from engineers on projects now, and that's environmental product declarations, EPDs. So let's get started. So what is an environmental product declaration, an EPD? It's a standardized document that provides detailed information about the environmental impact of a product throughout its entire life cycle. This includes everything from material extraction, manufacturing, transportation, use, and end-of-life disposal. EPDs are developed according to ISO 14025 or EN 15804 for construction products. They help us understand the environmental footprint of the products we use and make informed choices to reduce our impact on the planet. As we try to reduce the carbon footprint of buildings, we're seeing more people ask for EPDs on HVAC equipment. They are also included in LEED version v4. To create an EPD, a manufacturer needs to perform a comprehensive life cycle assessment, an LCA, which means looking at every stage of the product's life and quantifying its environmental impacts. Let's slide this over to make some room. EPDs need to show raw material acquisition. They need to show the environmental impact of extracting and processing all the materials in all of the components. Next, we have manufacturing. They have to assess the production processes. This includes the energy consumed in the factory of the product and its components, the emissions generated, and any waste produced. They also have to consider the transportation of components to the manufacturing site. Then there's transportation. They have to consider how the finished product is transported from the factory to the end user. Different modes of transportation have different environmental impacts. Let's slide this over one more time. Next, we have installation. Once the product reaches its destination, they need to consider the installation process. This includes the energy and materials used during installation. And then we have the use phase. Now the product is in operation. They need to look at the energy consumption, efficiency, and any emissions during its operational life. Regular maintenance and replacement parts also factor into this stage. And finally, we have end of life. They have to consider what happens when the product reaches its end of life. This includes decommissioning, recycling, and disposal. They need to understand the environmental impact of each of these processes. Now let's move this over and look at an example. For a product like flooring or insulation, that's relatively straightforward because it has maybe a single or a few base components. Here's an example of a European insulation EPD that I found. This first table, you can see there are a handful of components and how much is in the product. The bottom table is showing the various stages of the life cycle that are called out in the standard. This next table shows the GWP and other environmental factors for the product by life cycle stage. And then this table shows the waste by stage. There are also tables showing average distance the product is transported and other things like that. You can see that it's a pretty detailed report. And let's make more room again. For HVAC equipment, it'd be a lot more complicated to get this information. For instance, for a heat pump, you would need to cover the entire life cycle of the product, including all the components that make up the heat pump, such as steel, aluminum, insulation, refrigerants, and so on. You would need to know the production processes involved in assembling the heat pump, including the energy consumption and emission from the manufacturing facilities, transportation of the components to the manufacturing facility, and the waste generated during the manufacturing process for the heat pump and all of its components. Then you would also need to know the installation, or maybe a typical installation, its operation and maintenance, and finally the end-of-life decommissioning and disassembly of the heat pump. Let's slide this over again. So when I talk about knowing the environmental impact, there are several factors you need to know, like global warming potential. This is the impact on climate change due to greenhouse gas emissions. You also need to know the ozone depletion potential. This is the impact on the stratospheric ozone layer. Another one is the acidification potential. which is the impact on the soil and water bodies due to acidifying emissions. Move it over again. Another one is the eutrophication potential. This is the impact on aquatic environments due to nutrient enrichment. Another one is the photochemical ozone creation potential. This is the contribution to ground level ozone formation, also known as smog. And then there's resource use. This is the consumption of renewable and non-renewable resources. Let's move it over again. You would need to know all of this for the components like the compressor, the heat exchangers, the refrigerant, electronics, controls, piping, insulation, fans, and so on. As you can imagine, this means that the heat pump manufacturer and all their suppliers would need to have this information. And then with this level of detail, there could also be concern about manufacturers who have proprietary or patented materials that they wouldn't want to disclose this level of detail about. On top of that, EPDs must be independently verified by a third party, so there's an additional time and expense related to that. We're at the beginning of people requesting EPDs and of manufacturers trying to figure out how to do EPDs on more complex HVAC equipment. So we'll probably hear a lot more about this in the future. Let's bring all of this back on screen now. There's also an alternative environmental report that we're hearing about, and I'm going to talk about that next week. So that's it for today's video. I hope you found the overview of EPDs helpful. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in the future, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.